JAZZ Radio Express with DJ Justine. Now you know. Good day, everybody. I am your DJ Justine, and today we are going to talk about the universal features of the language. What is language?
Language is a system of conventional spoken, manual, or written symbols by means of which human beings, as members of a social group and participants in its culture, express themselves.
Oh, now I know! For more information, just call us.
Hola, Mr. DJ. I am the caller, and I am here to ask you a question. Can you give me the information that talks about the universal features of the language? That's all. Thank you, Mr. DJ.
Alright, to answer that question, we're going to talk about the language, the basic components and features of language in general. So starting off with just a general definition of language. So if you've ever taken a linguistic subject, you could actually have a whole semester dedicated to defining what a language is. The definition of language is a little bit more complicated than you would expect. So language, it's not just how you talk. It's a way to communicate. It can combine words verbally. It could combine symbols written down, which includes letters, or in other language, it could include hieroglyphics or any kind of symbology that different from the ABC alphabet symbols. It could also include hand signs in sign language. The term language universal refers to those features or properties of language that are common to all languages. The notion that language might share universal features creates a tension of sorts with conception of language, as developed by Boas and other early linguistic anthropologists that held that language were infinitely variable, that there were no constraints on the form of human language could take. This view was seriously challenged in the second half of 20th century by the work of Chomsky and other linguists, and also by work on cultural universal carried out by anthropologists such as Berlin, Kay, and Brown. Universals can be found at all levels of language analysis, including phonology, morphology, syntax, and semantics. However, it is important to note that some universals are more universal than others. Universals may be absolute, implicational, or relative. Features that are found in all languages without exception are called absolute universals. For example, all languages make use of dual patterning, have a low unrounded vowel similar to a, have the principle of structure dependency, allow both yes, no, and questions, allow for negation, have morphemes with the properties of nouns and verbs, and have pronouns for both first and second person. Implicational universals take the form of entailment propositions. If X is present, then Y is also present. For example, if language has a rounded front vowel such as Y or E of French, it will also have the corresponding unrounded front vowel, in this case, I as in dire. If a language has like Japanese subject, object, verb, word order, it will probably have post position. If a language has a word denoting the color blue, it will also have words for green and yellow. Relative universals refers to the tendencies, features that most but not all languages have. For example, languages tend to have at least 5 vowels, but some, such as Aymara in Bolivia, have 3. Most languages have a nasal consonant sound like and n, but Wichita, Native American language from Western USA, does not. Similarly, languages tend to have pronouns for third person, she, they, he, but Latin does not. All proposed language universals are hypotheses constructed from a sample of what is available. As hypotheses, they are always subject to falsification. For example, while it appears that all known languages had or have a vowel similar to a, we could, in principle, come across a previously unknown language lacking that vowel. It could also be the case that languages that existed in the past but that disappeared before any written or other record of them could be made did not have a vowel similar to a.
That's all for today. I am your DJ Justine, signing off at JAZZ Radio Express.
A pleasant day to everyone. I am Cristia de los Santos and I am going to discuss the biological and cultural aspects of language. Biological and cultural aspects of language. Biological foundation of language production and acquisition. The foundation of language biologically. But first, we will talk about what the word language and biological means. Language is the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way and conveyed by speech, writing, and gesture. Biological is used to describe processes and states that occur in the bodies and cells of living things. Have you ever asked yourself on how human language is being processed by the brain? Or have you ever wondered what is going on inside our brain while we're thinking or before we even say a word? Well, language production is more complex than what you thought it is. But in this video, we will make it simple on how language is being processed before we even say a word. Language production and acquisition has complex process, though, biologically speaking, it's undeniable that brain, which function first before the production and acquisition of the language. There are certain parts of the brain that are responsible in sound production and acquisition. The major parts of the brain that are responsible in language production. Let's begin with the theory of brain lateralization. Brain lateralization theory is stressed up on the fact that the two holes of the brain known as the right and left hemispheres function differently but yet interdependently. The left hemisphere of the brain is more analytical in nature and pay attention to details, handles assignment, or processes information sequentially and takes care of the tasks like writing, reading, and speaking. This hemisphere of the brain is also concerned with reasoning, rationality, logic, discipline, and rules dealing with hard facts. People with a strong hemisphere have an inclination for science, math, and technology. They also have their clear picture of their goals due to a clear sense of planning, are physically quite active and extroverted in nature. The left hemisphere controls the right portion of the body. The right hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere of the brain deals with the softer facets of life. This hemisphere of the brain is concerned with emotion, feelings, intuitions, visualization, spatial knowledge, and creativity, and recognizing patterns. Right hemisphere also helps in making inferences and provides holistic perception, as a result of which right hemisphere is helpful in developing a strong self-perception or sense of self-awareness. Right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, looks after the motor skills, sports and play, risk-enduring capabilities, variety, flexibility, and people with strong right hemisphere are mostly introverted. Yet, talking about language, it is the left hemisphere which is highly responsible to the production of language. As it explained, left hemisphere controls fine movements, such as those required to produce speech. There are two areas in particular that appear to be especially important for language. An area toward the front of the brain in the frontal lobe that includes Broca's area, in an area more or less beneath or behind the ear toward the back of the temporal lobe called Wernicke's area. These two regions form a language implementation wherein in Wernicke's area happen the analysis of word or comprehension, and transferring into Broca's area for speech production. Classically, Broca's area has been associated with speech production and Wernicke's area with auditory comprehension, production of speech sound. Wernicke's area, named after Carl Wernicke, is the region of the brain that is important for language development. It is located in the temporal lobe on the left side of the brain. It is responsible for comprehension of speech, while Broca's area, named after Paul Broca, is related to the production of speech. Language development or usage can be seriously impaired by damage to Wernicke's area of the brain. When this area of the brain is damaged, a disorder known as Wernicke's aphasia can result, with a person being able to speak in phrases that sound fluent yet lack meaning. Other than the two regions, the Broca's area and the Wernicke, there are some important parts of the brain as shown in Wernicke-Jaskind model. So here is the model. As you can see, we have number 1, the primary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex controls the movement of the muscles. Number 2, we have Broca's area, wherein it involves the production of speech sounds. Number 3, we have the primary auditory cortex. This is the region of the brain that processes sound and thereby contributes to our ability to hear. Number 4, the Wernicke's area. It involves the understanding of speech. Number 5, the angular gyrus. It assembles information to help us understand words and concepts. Number 6, we have primary visual cortex, located in the posterior pole of the occipital cortex, the simplest, earliest cortical visual area. It is highly specialized for processing information about static and moving objects and is excellent in pattern recognition. Number 7, arcuate fasciculus. It connects Wernicke's area to Broca's area. How speech production happens at the very first place. Now, let's trace the brain activity that occurs during a conversation. According to this model, when you are listening to someone talk, their voice is converted into signals that are sent to the primary auditory cortex and then conducted to Wernicke's area. This is where we can imagine that the words are actually comprehended, as this is where rural representation of thoughts underlying the reply is generated, which is then sent via the arcuate fasciculus over the Broca's area. From there, information is sent to the primary motor cortex, which controls the muscles in your mouth so that you may respond. Instead, when reading aloud, the visual information of the written words is set to primary visual cortex, and this information is transmitted to angular gyrus, which translate the written word into the corresponding auditory signal and send that to Wernicke's area for comprehension. The rest follows the same path that is already outlined. We should know that this is simply a model and is likely somewhat an oversimplification of brain function. After the brain processes the information, of course, it is time to deliver the words. Information by the vocal tract. The part of the mouth involved in making speech sounds are called articulator. Three parts of the mouth cannot move: the upper teeth, the alveolar ridge, and the hard palate. These are therefore known as passive articulators. The other parts can move and are called active articulators. The tongue is the very important active articulator, as it is often brought into contact with another part of the mouth in order to make a closure. The production of language seems very easy, but it is more complex than we thought it is. From Wernicke's to Broca's area until we sound the word that we want to say. So that is a short glimpse about biological foundation of language, especially in sound production. We are done discussing about how language is being processed by the brain before even sounding it. Now, let's move to the biology of acquisition. How we acquire the knowledge that we have and store it in our brain and retrieve it. Memory is one of the cognitive capacity by which we recall information and reconstruct past experiences visually bound for present purposes. Memory is one of the most important ways by which our histories are related to our current actions and experiences. Memory seems to be source and resource of knowledge, according to Galloway 2009. We remember experiences and events which are not happening now. Therefore, memory differs from perception. We remember events which really happened. If there was not a brain damage, so memory is not like mere imagination. Biologically, there is a long procedure taking place in our brain, while an event is inscribed into the hemisphere. Moreover, we will be focusing in a biological process how information been acquired and processed in our memory. Based on the interpretation of mental functioning, environmental information is excessively encoded, stored, and retrieved by a set of distinct mental structure. To simplify it, this is the model of how information is being processed in our brain. There are three mental structures in the model. We have sensory stores or memory, working memory, long-term memory, or permanent memory. It starts from environmental stimuli. Those stimuli are being captured by our senses, the sound we heard, and the other sensory event to which we are constantly exposed, especially the usual information and the iconic information and auditory information. So now, let's take a look on the sensory stores. This involves our senses that take in a variety of colors, tones, taste, and smell that are experienced each day and retain them for a brief time in raw and analyzed form. It is assumed that we have one sensory store for each sensory system, but visual and auditory stores have been studied in detail. The rest of the information that are not needed are lost. Number 2, we have working memory. This is also traditionally referred to as short-term memory. Although the meanings of the terms are similar, there is still a difference between them. Short-term storage means information are stored in a few seconds, but a working memory is the combination of storage and processing of information before it goes to long-term memory. During this period, only the important information is retained in short-term memory. This information is called selective attention. This allows you to ignore other barriers like noise to select particular information needed in the unrehearsed information, or unimportant ones are being eliminated or lost. Number 3, permanent memory or long-term memory. Once information is stored in short-term memory, it goes to long-term memory through a process called encoding. Meanwhile, long-term memory is brought into consciousness once needed through a process called retrieval. This includes general knowledge such as the rules of grammar or arithmetic, along with person who experienced such memory of your childhood. Permanent memory holds only information we retained from the past that is not currently active, still in working memory. These memory are used to interpret new information, and in turn the new events will later be added to this house of information. Tulding 1972 has distinguished between two types of permanent memory. Number 1, we have the semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory refers to our organized knowledge of words, concepts, symbols, and objects. It includes such broad classes of information as motor skills, typing, swimming, bicycling. General knowledge like grammar and arithmetic is special knowledge, the typical layout of house and social skills, how to begin and end conversations, rules of self-disclosure. On the other hand, episodic memory holds trace of events that are specific in time and place. This is the memory that we use to keep a record of our personal experiences. It thus varies from person to person and time to time, but remember that it is constantly updated. For us, semantic memory is relatively stable. Episodic memory includes such items as what you had for breakfast this morning, or what you were doing on September 11th till today, and when you got your first job. So this is the short biological explanation of language acquisition, but in terms of acquisition, it is a broader concept which we can explore more. In summary, in production of language, we have Broca's area and Wernicke's area. And in terms of language acquisition, biologically, we have these three mental processes: the sensory store, working memory, and the permanent memory. Social and cultural aspects of language, its implication in language teaching. Social linguistics as a new discipline. Any discussion on language and its social and cultural aspects, be it for research or learning and teaching purposes, will never get comprehensive views without tracing back to the history of modern linguistics as a relatively new discipline. Through the development of modern linguistics in the beginning of 20th century was put forward by some anthropologists such as Franz Boas and Edward Sapir, who consider that language and culture are interlocked and interdependent. Further development of linguistics seen as American structuralism by Leonard Bloomfield in his Language in 1933 ignored the social cultural aspect of language. This school of thought, which is much influenced by behaviorism psychology, considers language as a separate discipline in that investigation of language were done on the basis of observable linguistic behavior. Its theory of language teaching is seen as an attempt of conditioning. From this, we are familiar with the so-called audiolingual method or oral approach, which was so widely used in language teaching classes in 1960s. Probably, some conservative language teachers still use this approach up to the present time. In this approach, language is seen as habit formation, which can be acquired through drills and repetition of sentence patterns. On the other hand, in 1960s, a new linguistic school of thought was developed, a new reaction toward the structuralism, which is called social linguistics, introduced by some prominent linguistics such as Joshua Fishman, John Gomperz, Charles Ferguson, and an anthropologist like Del Haynes. This school of thought considers that language and society are related. This means that language can never be understood and studied fully without understanding its social and cultural context. Language is not merely a means of communication, but also an instrument to show human social identity and establish social and cultural relationships. And that to speak that language is seen as cultural event. From her, pragmatics was also developed. The more systematic and wider way to investigate language as the speech of human group dates to 1960s. Linguistics came into the existence as new discipline. Some call it a sociology of language, linguistics plus an opposite of theoretical linguistics. Consequently, new approaches in language investigations, language learning, and teaching were also developed with their new theoretical considerations. Haymes and Wardorf, 1986, 238 to 240, has proposed an ethnographic framework which takes into account the various factors that are involved in speaking as a cultural event. An ethnography of a communicative event is the description of all the factors that are relevant in understanding how that particular communicative event achieved its objectives. HIMES classifies social cultural events into 16 categories. For convenience, HIMES uses the word speaking as an acronym for his framework. This framework can be used as a guide in foreign language teaching, which involve the social and cultural aspect of language. Let us now consider those components one by one. S means setting and scene of speech. Setting refers to the place and time, the concrete physical circumstances in which speech takes place. Scene refers to the abstract psychological setting or the cultural definition of the occasion. P means participants. It includes various combination of speakers, listeners, addressor, addressee, or sender to receiver. They generally fill certain socially specified roles. A conversation involves a speaker and listener, whose roles change. E refers to ends, which means expected outcomes of an exchange as well as to the personal goals that participants seek to accomplish on particular occasion. A refers to act, sequence, which means the action, form, and context of what I said, including the precise of words used, how they are used, and the relationships of what is said to the actual topic at hand. This is what most linguists have long shown an interest, particularly those who study discourse and conversation. K refers to key, which means the tones, manner, or spirit in which a particular message is conveyed, serious, precise, relaxed, and so on. I refers to instrumentalities, which means the choice of channel to convey message, example oral, written, or telegraphic, email, etc., and to the actual forms of speech employed, such as the language, dialect, code, or register that is chosen. N refers to norms of interaction and interpretation, which means the specific behaviors and proprieties that attach to speaking and also to how this may be viewed by someone who does not share them. G refers to genre, which include types of utterance such as poems, proverbs, prayers, lectures, and editorials. The speaking model is much useful to be considered when preparing materials and how to teach them to the students. HIMES model emphasizes authenticity, which means teaching materials should be arranged in such a way that they perform as the real language atmosphere.
What exactly is language? Language is a system of speech, manual, or written symbols that humans use to communicate. It enables us to communicate, interpret, and play. It helps us to share with others and identify ourselves. What exactly is culture? A group of people's characteristics and patterns of behavior define their culture. Language, arts, and customs are the basic categories we use to characterize culture. Culture teaches us how to think, communicate with others, and perceive our surroundings. This is your cultural perspective. What is the relation between culture and language? Within a social community, culture and language share human beliefs, realities, and actions. As a result, there is a relationship between culture and language, whether it's national folklore or everyday conversation. Language and culture go in hand. Paralanguage is the non-lexical portion of any culture's language. It's a broad word that encompasses things like body language and voice, pitch, or sound. Depending on where you grew up, the paralanguage will be different. We pick up on those behaviors, expressions, and intonations from the people around us. Body language that conveys conflict in one country sometimes views as supportive in another. If you are bilingual, you've noticed how your voice shifts when you speak many languages. You can also note that your gestures or even attitudes change as the result of this. How language and culture are interlinked. Language changes often to represent a culture's changing values. Language and culture are inextricably related, and you can't learn one without first knowing the other. Language is related to all features of human life in society, and comprehension of the surrounding culture is the key to learning a language. The language also allows for the development of evolution of cultural values. What is the relation between culture and language? Ken Hale, a well-known linguist, discusses the relationship between culture and language. He claims that when a language loses, a piece of culture is also lost, as culture has a strong influence on the language. Our fundamental traditions, ideals, and interpersonal interactions are influenced by culture. Language, on the other hand, makes these exchanges quick. Language promotes social connections. At the same time, culture aids our learning on how to connect with others. Language and culture evolution. Do you know what language and culture have in common? Both are constantly developing. For example, the English we use today is very different from the English of the past. Similarly, there are many variations between old and modern Western cultures. There's no language without culture. What role do language and culture play in our personality? The language and culture you experience in life have a significant impact on your personality. Culture shapes beliefs and ethics by telling you how to deal with others. Furthermore, it keeps you in touch with like-minded people. Also, it strengthens your sense of belonging to society. Language, on the other hand, is a resource that allows you to communicate your culture. In reality, language uses to convey cultural ideas and beliefs. In online forums, people could use a different version of the same language, which would be very different from the media's language and educated individuals. The language uses in several ways. There are three types of linguistic varieties. First, geographical. It is only used in specific areas of the community. Second, social. Varieties used by societal groups based on occupation, gender, and age. Third, practical. It is language used for specific purposes, example, used based on the function and situation. As a result of these factors, dialects emerge, adding to the language's richness. You must be mindful of cultural differences to communicate effectively. Suppose you want to improve your language skills in a second language. Then it would be helpful if you address both of the culture and language at the same time.
Katrina IIV, Village in BS Social Studies 111.